Okay, we are recording. I am joined today by Mary-Beth Willard, who is a philosopher at Weber State University. She's author of the book Why It's Okay to Enjoy the Work of Immoral Artists from Rutledge. And I'm also joined by Erich Hatala Matthes from Wellesley College, who's the author of the book Drawing the Line, What to Do with the Work of Immoral Artists from Museums to the Movies. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks.
And
it's great to be here. Good to see you both.
Yeah, good to see you both again, together as opposed to separately.
When our powers combine.
I think we need two more people to call like Captain Philosophy or Captain Aesthetics.
Hang on, I've lost my. I've been sitting in my office long enough. The lights went out. I think this happened the last time I talked to you too. We still haven't fixed the problem.
Yeah. Awesome. So we are talking about the question of what artists owe us. And I want to start with the issue of what should we expect from artists, since we shouldn't expect them to be saints, right? And so, you've both written on what we should do with the work of immoral artists. So either of you, have at it.
You want to start, Mary-Beth?
I don't know. I mean, then you can start and I can riff on it and it'll sound better.
Okay,
no.
sure.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
yeah, you go ahead.
So I think a big point for me when it comes to thinking about what we should expect from artists is that I think we should expect of them what we expect of any other person.
Yeah.
So I feel like a big problem that we've created in sort of our moral culture around the arts is that we have this idea that because we're talking about great artists, our moral expectations for them can be like, in the gutter, right? As if the fact that they're great artists just sort of justifies them, right, being terrible people. And I think we do this with athletes too. So it's not just in the arts, but with famous people who are high achievers of some kind. So it really feels like we've expected too little from artists. And so it's not even so much that I think we need to raise the moral bar for artists above the average consumer. It's just that we need to expect of them what we expect of just anybody. There was this New York Times op-ed that I wrote a little bit about in my book, where at the end of the piece, the author who was writing about this question said, the cruel thing about art, of great art anyway, is that it requires its practitioners to be wrapped up in themselves in a way that's a little inhuman. And sort of that attitude, right? Yeah, right. That's sort of it's you have to be kind of an asshole to be a great artist. It's like, yeah, no, let's change our expectations.
I mean, it's certainly been a really common thing to think, right? It goes back to the Renaissance, it's the terribilità of the inspired genius who's just mad for his art, or all of the romantic bullshit, right? Which is like, oh, I'm so drunk on my art, I can't do anything like take care of my tuberculosis or, be kind to anybody else. And so I think that's right? I just want them to be held to the standards of ordinary people. But interestingly, I was almost tempted to go the other direction, which is to say that we often hold people, celebrities, I think more generally, to a really, really high standard, right? Look at Simone Biles, and for example, and the mental health pressures, and also proprioception problems at the Olympics. The idea is that because she is a world-class athlete and decorated champion, that she should be perfect in all aspects of her life, right? Or sports heroes are supposed to be role models, or artists, everything that they do is under the microscope. So I think in some sense, we're not actually consistent about this, right? On the other hand, we're kind of like, well, they're artists. They're going to demand that their M&Ms are all green, and they're going to get away with what they can, and they're going to be horrible to their families and go to Tahiti or whatever, nonsense we come up with. But we also expect them to be in some ways like exemplars of how should I put it? People with all the gifts, right? They should be good at everything. They should be good at mental health. They should be good at speaking. They should be always composed in public, and they should always be on in a way that is unhealthy. So yeah, let's just have them be normal human beings. And if they do bad things, they get called to account for it. And if they do good things, yay. And if they make awesome art, we can enjoy it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think you can solve this problem because obviously if we can trace it back for, hundreds, if not thousands of years, there's something about, I don't know, being good at things that makes people willing to give you a pass on being an asshole in the rest of your life. And I don't know why.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Mary-Beth. And I think, also, so I mean, I think there are the dimensions of like, with athletes in particular, I think we have this culture, at least in the States, where we do sort of expect athletes to be role models in a way that I don't know that we expect artists to be role models. Maybe some artists, right?
Yeah,
it probably
yeah, I
depends
think
on
that's
like the
fair.
genre that we're talking about. It's like if you're like a Disney star, right? Like then you need to be a role model.
Right.
Yeah, but then
it's
with
probably in your contract, right? That you need to have a certain image in public, right?
Yeah, morality clauses and whatnot.
Yeah,
exactly.
purity rings and all that, right? Like back with the Jonas brothers.
Yeah. So that's such an interesting case. So I think that one way in which I think that sometimes the expectations that we hold artists to can, in particular, be sort of higher or different than the expectations we have for just sort of the average person on the street, is when like the artist has already sort of ushered morality onto the scene through the way that they have presented their work or cultivated their audience. So I think that you get into situations where like if you have an artist like a singer-songwriter whose work is all about like protesting capitalism or something,
right,
and then it turns out that they're like actually just like some corporate shill, like that seems like a case where like our expectations can be different because the artist has actually kind of invited us to have those expectations and then busted them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one thing that I think that as I was reading your book and then like rereading my own, thinking like, what am I thinking of? Do I still think that one of the things that I wrote? I don't know. How much genre plays into our expectations of artists, right? Because if you think of, I mean, we both talked about Cosby, right? And how Cosby's image as America's dad, like the sweaters, the pudding pops, the overlap with his activist work is sort of like a Black conservative in his life. Is really important to his image, but you don't have the same expectations that you would of, say, like a rock star, right? That, I mean, there's plenty of examples, right, of 70s rock musicians and groupies, right? And it just was a very different attitude in terms of like what the expectations for that artist should be. And I think, in my book, I tried to locate it a little bit like in how comedy works, but I think I could probably extend it to kind of like what we expect the genre to reflect of like the artist's true self or true beliefs, right? So it's I don't know, do they have alternative rock anymore? But like the alternative rock musicians, like I don't think you can sell out in 2021. I think that's like a 1996 idea, and I've actually argued for this. But if you could sell out, right, you might think that that's something that applies to alternative rock, but not pop, right? Because pop, like, of course you're artificial and pink and glitzy, like that's what you are. But you're not if you're supposed to be a garage band that just happened to get lucky, right? That kind of idea. So there's this interplay, I think, between the kind of work that's produced. I don't know if genre is quite the right word here. That's the one I grabbed earlier, but like the type of work that's produced and the kind of person we expect to produce that thing. And if there are values in the artwork that they're supposed to be embodying, right? As the artists who produce it.
Yeah,
and then I
totally.
think that's partially like why we're so pissed at Cosby, right? I mean, aside from the fact that it's like there goes like the only thing that like my very strict parents allowed me to watch in the 80s is now this horrible thing. It's like that was like, you really had to kind of buy that he believed what he was doing, even though there's writers and it's fiction, that like his comic sensibility was infusing the show. And if it feels like that wasn't in some way authentic, it diminishes the value of the art, for me at least.
Yeah, and I think that's totally appropriate when it comes to artists who really, through their work are exploiting the ambiguity between person and persona.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Like they're like, you can't be surprised, right, to be held right to a certain standard right? When like your whole shtick is based on, right, the fact that you're sort of selling like yourself, right, the artist,
Right.
in some particular guise, even if we know there's some extent to which it is like a persona, right? Like you're trading on that ambiguity. And that's, you know, I think true of Cosby, of Louis C.K., of Woody Allen, of, you know, lots of these people, where like, even if we sort of put aside the really like morally horrific things that they did, right? There are still ways in which I think we could feel justifiably annoyed or betrayed by them if they acted in ways that compromised that persona because of the way that they're sort of exploiting that ambiguity. But I think, you know, that's the case that I think really makes sense of that response. Whereas like you can easily see how if for just, you know, whatever your run-of-the-mill actor, if people sort of hold that actor to like the standard of acting like some character they portrayed in a movie or TV show, that would be ridiculous. Like I remember reading this interview with Danny Pudi, who plays Abed on Community, you know, who's like a very esoteric character. And it was something about, this was a long time ago, but it was something how people would like come up to him on the street and expecting him to like act like Abed. And he's like, that's a character, folks. Like I'm an actor. That's what I do, right? But like, I feel like for the people who really like exploit that ambiguity between person and role, they don't have that response available to them.
Right. And I mean, I think one thing that complicates it a little is that in general, people do typecast actors pretty easily or expect them to be like the characters that they portray. And I think that, you know, whether that's an emotional failing, I mean, look at the cognitive science literature has these examples of, you know, I mean, it's an old example, but the actor who played, you know, Dr. Marcus Welby sells Sanka coffee, right? Because people are used to seeing him as like your friendly doctor. Yeah, clearly, like I think that's one of Tamar Gendler's papers or examples. So it's like clearly, you know, this is like 80s TV commercials, right? But it exploits that ambiguity. And like Cosby does that, of course, with like the pudding pops, right? This is, you know, an America's Dad sort of thing that was pretty much Cosby selling pudding pops as Cliff Huxtable. But like we make those mistakes all the time, even, you know, actors who, you know, try to play against type, right? Because they don't want to be typecast as a villain because they happen to play it once, right? And you can see it in career choices, like, well, I played an evil, sketchy villain, so this time I'm playing the hero and I'm going to be really buff, right? And like look muscular, so I look like a good guy, right? Because we do this, right? So part of it, and like I was worried about this, look, I'm like, we're just making a cognitive mistake, right? Like, you know, like asking George Clooney for medical advice because he was on ER once upon a time, right? But I don't think that's entirely what it is. And I think you've got it right. It's like when the artist invites us to view the work as an extension of themselves. Comedy being the example that we both hit on, but I think you can find others that it's going to be like actually right to evaluate the work that way because that informs how you understand it, right?
Yeah, good. And I think on that too, like I think fans of Mötley Crüe, for example, if they were to find out that like, you know, they have afternoon tea, they're like chill, relaxed, homebodies, right? That fans would be disappointed, right? Because there's this attitude that the music is an extension of them, their lyrics are an extension of them, their music videos are an extension of them. And I mean, in fact, it was by and large, I think. But, you know, I think there would be that disappointment where, oh, you're really boring in real life.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's, you know, speaking of Mary-Beth's point about genre, right? I think that, like you say, in certain artistic contexts, I think it's true in, you know, some genres of music, maybe in, you know, some, you know, poetry, maybe, right? Like arts where we think of the art as sort of constitutively involving like the expression of particular, right, commitments, emotions, ideals, sentiments, right? Like for those art forms in particular, I think that, you know, audiences are not out of line when, you know, they find out that the artist like doesn't actually have the commitments that they claim to have in their work, and that they've sort of cultivated their audience through. So I feel like these are examples where it's not about sort of like imposing moral standards on the artist, but rather like the artist has already let moral considerations in the door. And so like once they're in the house, like, you know, they get to party.
Yeah, I'm thinking here, you mentioned the Mötley Crüe thing, but I think there was actually like the woman who wrote the Interview with the Vampire series, Anne Rice, right? It shows up at her book signings like carried in a coffin and all in black, and when I remember reading an article where like when she's at home, it's like Laura Ashley dresses and like nice flowers and a very pretty, non-vampire styled house. Or another example of this might be the sort of Clay Aiken controversy, I'd say, where his popularity after coming in second on one of the American Idols, with like kind of a Southern Christian fan base that didn't survive revelations about his personal life, where they were like, wait a second, we liked you and we thought you were this, and it's kind of like, but kind of he invited it, right, in a way, you might say, by catering to an audience with a set of beliefs and things like that. So yeah, I think maybe it's about like, we're not actually imposing it on the artist when we're not talking about things like, assault and stuff like that, when it's just like, hey, does your persona match the thing that you're putting forward? That's oftentimes the artist brought that in the first place. Right. So then we're just saying, well, now your work doesn't make sense because you invited us to think of it as an extension of yourself, but here's what we know about you. So.
Yeah. And I think that to sort of get back to what you were saying earlier about sort of actors, for instance, trying to not get typecast and sort of diversify their roles, you might even see as an attempt to like avoid the kind of association between themselves in a role that, some of the comedians are themselves inviting. And so like then it seems like particularly wrong to like hold them to some sort of like character standard where they're like, no, that's not me.
I mean, and there's the thing of like looking like a certain part, right? Like, being the clean cut all-American boy or what have you. But I remember reading an interview with Matt Damon where he was looking at the script for The Martian, which is a huge hit, but he'd just come off of Interstellar, where he plays an astronaut who's lost in space. And he called his agent. He's like, this is great. He's like, but I can't do 2 movies back to back where I'm an astronaut that's lost in space. Like, what's going to happen? And I think his agent eventually said something along the lines of like, you're Matt Damon, man. Like, this after you've done the Bourne series, you've like you'll be okay. This is going to be worthwhile. That you'd say like, yeah, like even this is good. This is not like a moral question. This is like just too many lost astronauts for one career.
Yeah, totally.
It's something to think about.
Yeah, and I think with the characters and type, I mean, I think we are here sort of mostly talking about audience expectations and feelings of betrayal in a less moral sense, right? It's like a sense that has less to do with some of like the really like egregious personal life issues that have come up with, with Cosby and, R. Kelly and people.
But I think that's important though, right? Because I think that's often what's driving it. Because because it's not like we have like a list of things that are particularly bad and we hate artists in proportion to the extent they've committed things on that list, right? It might the same crime or same transgression might bother us in some cases more than others. So I think actually a lot of it is being driven by this betrayal. It's just compounded by the fact that this person also got away with raping people for 35 years or, with sexual assault or, sex trafficking or what have you. I think it's because when you see it in cases where the person, for whatever reason, is more sympathetic, like all of the 70s rock stars, where people are like, oh, well, that was just the 70s. I'm like, but it's still kind of, sketch.
Yeah.
Right. It's clear that it's not just like a dispassionate, like here's like how we expect people to behave. It's interwoven with this whole idea of like who you are as a performer. And which is also why it's bad to let this take the place of like actual justice, right? Because you'll care about the people with the squeaky clean image doing bad things more than you will about like the bad boy rock stars. And that's not how like justice is supposed to work. It makes a horrible surrogate for actual like institutional reform.
Yeah. And it's like I have this example in my book where I talk about like Woody Allen fans would feel, I think, justifiably betrayed if, totally apart from all the stuff about Woody Allen's personal life, he tried to like, make a movie where he was like, you know, like the hero, like saving
Yeah.
the day, right? You
Yeah.
know, like you can't have like action star Woody Allen. And I think if you were, you know, somebody who liked Woody Allen's sort of like brand of,
Mhm.
you know, of comedy and filmmaking, you might very well go to a movie like that and be like, what was that? Like that wasn't a Woody Allen movie, and like feel betrayed in an artistic sense, right? That doesn't have
Yeah.
much to do with the moral stuff. But I totally agree with you that it's sort of like they end up sort of piggybacking on one another.
Yeah.
It's like the same mechanisms, but then the moral stuff really like ramps it up. But it's what's interesting there though is that like you were saying, you know, we don't want it to be the case where we only hold like the artists who have like, you know, a shiny, pristine persona to a high standard, right? We want to sort of like hold everybody to like certain standards of moral decency. But it doesn't seem to be the case that we just like give people a free pass, even if they have cultivated, right, a very sort of like, you know, morally ambiguous character.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think we're increasingly now, like in the past few months, you know, saw some really, you know, horrifying accusations made against Marilyn Manson, for instance, right? And so like the fact that Marilyn Manson has spent a career cultivating this sort of, you know, like moral bad boy persona, I don't think is going to like protect him against those accusations, nor should it, right? I mean, if it does, that would be bad.
This is something I really want to figure out because I noticed it when I was writing on Cosby and thinking about Louis C.K. And I think we mentioned this last time I spoke with you, Brandon. I don't remember if it was in the part that was filmed or just in chatting afterwards, that there's something kind of weird about how much what he was accused of matched with his kind of persona. And so you kind of can get it from both directions, right? Like in the Cosby case, it's a problem, not just because it's immoral, but because it goes against the Huxtable sort of persona. In the Louis C.K. case, it's problematic because it's immoral, and now he feels like we were kind of taken advantage of by somebody who was using his comedy to sort of sanctify his own screw-ups, right? So there's this sort of like, I don't know, it's weird, right? So one hand, you can get into trouble when what you've done like completely undermines your persona, or you can get into trouble because what you've done kind of augments your persona or makes people think that that persona that we didn't think was serious is now serious, right? And I'm still sorting through exactly like whether there's a consistent principle here, or if it's just, you know, one of those fun infinite disjuncts that don't really get you anywhere. But I think there's something about like saying like, oh, so you weren't joking when you were, you know, writing that song about XYZ because you were actually doing that, right? Is a different kind of horrifying than you were singing like Christmas carols and children's songs and doing XYZ, right? I still have to think that through. But
no, I think that's absolutely right, Mary-Beth. And I think part of it is that like we like dark, creepy shit in our art a lot of the time, right? Like we enjoy art that is morally complicated and makes us morally confused or morally repulsed, right? Or, you know, those are, you know, important features of a lot of people's engagement with the arts, but we don't want it to be real, right? Like, I mean, it's like one of the reasons why, you know, you get those like no animals were harmed in the making of this movie. It's like, you know, like, or
like I really loved Breaking Bad, right? I mean, like the whole age of like the rough hero, as Anne Eaton puts it, of the, you know, sort of anti-hero that you end up rooting for anyway. All very cool to have in fiction. Don't want any of them as next door neighbors, right? Like Walter White can keep that shit in Albuquerque. Like, do not bring that into the house next door to me. But very cool though, right? And I was reading something today. So have you seen any of Squid Game on Netflix? Okay. So this is a Korean drama that features essentially people who are playing, they're all in debt and they are trying to get out of debt by winning a game. And the game is to play children's games, but the penalty for losing is like instantly being shot. And it's quite surprising and gory and kind of horrifying because it's also very brightly lit and very like pastel. And it's like red light, green light, oops, you know, like shotgun and everything. And I've only seen the first episode, but in reading some of the reviews about it, because of course this is how you operate, right? Is like, oh, I watched an episode, let me read everything that's been written on it instead of going to sleep like a sensible person. People are like, yeah, the whole Ted Lasso moment where we're like, yay, we have a sensitive, kind main character, like that, like we're already in the backlash. Like, let's get us back to the stuff that we don't actually want to live next door to. And yeah, I don't want to have, Squid Game be a thing. I don't want to live next door to Walter White, but I'm really fascinated by how the writers and actors portray these, morally bad or ambiguous situations. And so we enjoy that. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to think about it. Like, I'm really inclined to, Eaton's view that part of like what we're drawn to it is just like the difficulty of it, right? It's hard to make somebody like Tony Soprano likable, right? To make a murderer likable, to make a drug lord likable, or even if he's not likable, like rootable, right? Like to have them be the protagonist in that way. So maybe it's just like you admire the difficulty of the achievement, but maybe we just are kind of like, we like ambiguities and we're all a little sick that way. And fiction is a good outlet for that because we don't want it in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, the fiction arts in general, like give us this space to sort of explore and wonder and imagine. And that's going to include stuff that's morally complicated that we want to sort of explore and wonder and imagine about. But that doesn't entail anything about what we think would be right to do or to think when it comes to the real world. And so I agree there that like what ends up happening in some of these contexts is that it feels like a bait and switch, or like the rug has been pulled out from under us, because like in the Louis C.K. case, we're like, oh haha, like it's fine to sort of enjoy this sort of like morally messed up stuff in this fictional world. But then you're like, oh wait, all of a sudden you're like, wait, no, you've moved the line. Like now it's like a real thing, and I don't want to laugh at that.
Like, I didn't want a real thing. I didn't want to think that this was like autobiographical. Yeah. Like I very clearly needed this to be fictional, right? Not like justification for your own creepy behavior, right?
Yeah. So. And then I think that's where you get the betrayal feeling, and I think that betrayal is very justified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. And I mean, sorry, also, like, if we find out that Bryan Cranston is really a murderous meth dealer in real life, right, and that he's been doing this sort of secretly on the side, then his portrayal of Walter White is less of an achievement, right? Because he's just drawing from his autobiography, or if Anthony Hopkins was really a sociopathic cannibal, right? Like then Silence, his performance as Hannibal Lecter is like less interesting, right? Because he's drawing from real life.
Interestingly, with Cranston, I mean, at least part of the initial draw for me, I mean, completely swamped by like how good his performance was like, is that the dad from Malcolm in the Middle? Like, what is going on here? And then, of course, like, Cranston has had this like amazing career that sort of like happened with all of us not noticing. Malcolm in the Middle, like, extremely well respected. So I remember going the first couple of episodes, I'm like, how's this going to work? Like, and then of course, now he can play whatever the hell he wants, because now we all accept, oh, he's not just the dad from Malcolm in the Middle, right? But there was definitely this thing is like, wow, this Cranston guy has a ton of range, like, and clearly what he needed was like me to recognize this, right? At age 50. But it's, I think that's right. Like that, part of the achievement is playing against type, or the idea that like, hey, you're actually acting here. And if we admire it for the achievement that it is, it's less so if it's just, ripped from the headlines, Law and Order style.
Yeah, and I feel like the initial stuff with that character is sort of trading on his persona as the dad from Malcolm in the Middle, right? He's sort of goofy, he's sort of incompetent, but he's loving and caring. He's a concerned father. And so it sort of, takes that character and then puts him in a different world. And so it's very much this sort of banking on, the pre-existing associations between the actor and the character, and then starting to really mess with those.
Yeah, I think you're right. It had to be intentional a little bit, right? I mean, they obviously, anybody who they'd cast in the role, they would, set up as sort of like the, chemistry teacher with sort of ill-fitting clothes, working the second job and being like generally dad bod kind of awkward. But the fact that like our nearest resonance for that was the Malcolm in the Middle character, I think definitely added something to that. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think that kind of counter type casting can sometimes offer something really special to like fans of particular actors. So this example might be too niche, but like my personal favorite example of this is for Timothy Olyphant fans, right? So people who like, you know, Deadwood or Justified or whatever, where Timothy Olyphant is like, you know, like hard Scrabble, you know, like, you know, what's the man,
Gorgeous.
It's not a cop. No. Yes, he's very attractive. No.
I mean,
no,
I
I'm
was gonna
blanking
say
on- he's not a police officer.
He's
He's
sheriff or marshal.
lawman, like
Yeah.
sheriff lawman
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, right. But then if you watch the criminally canceled Santa Clarita Diet on Netflix, where Timothy Olyphant is just this sort of like bumbling dad character. It's like amazing. Like you get something special out of it if you were a fan of Olyphant in this very, very different role. Or I think another nice example of this that ties in with what you all were saying about, you know, they must have sort of made this choice with Bryan Cranston somewhat deliberately, is if you all remember What Lies Beneath, this horror movie starring Harrison Ford, which was very much at like I guess this was probably in like the early 2000s or something. I remember seeing it in theaters, but it definitely like it plays on the fact that Harrison Ford, you know, was, you know, always the hero, always the sort of lovable character. I think it was, you know, around the same time as like Air Force One kind of thing, right? And then like it's sort of a horror movie, and like spoiler alert, like Harrison Ford is the bad guy, and it's like they're obviously right. Like they chose Harrison Ford for this because it changes the viewer's expectations, right? So like that stuff can be really aesthetically cool, right? So whatever our theory is about sort of expectations and betrayal and stuff, we don't
it has to include that, right?
Right. Yeah. It has to make space for these kinds of things.
Because I mean that's often half the fun, right? Or just watching somebody like you kind of like Timothy Olyphant doing something different. There's a
U.S. Marshal. He's a U.S. Marshal. Sorry, I don't know why I had such a hard time remembering.
There we go. Yeah. I don't know. Have you seen the sort of like fan theory that Seth Bullock is like Raylan Givens' great grandfather or something, and you can like kind of trace it, and that's why they act exactly the same way and they sort of look the same. It's like,
sure, I'll take it.
Yeah. They, you know, somehow ended up in down in the holler somewhere via South Dakota or something like that. Yeah, there's I had another example of this kind of thing, and it's completely now escaped my mind. It got chased away by U.S. Marshals and things like that.
Sorry.
It was Tom Hiddleston, who was in this smaller thing called The Night Watchman, which is an adaptation of I think a Le Carre spy novel. But it was, you know, kind of in the middle of like, oh my gosh, he's going to play Loki forever and have like the sort of weird noodly slick back hair thing going on. And he's like his natural hair color. He's a redhead. He's got like some random muscles. That's kind of like, I need to have my shirt off in this scene just because like, damn it, I've had to be Thor's brother for 5 years. Right. And he's a very talented actor. Right. But I kept watching the thing. I'm like, you just really don't want to be Loki the rest of your life, do you? And it's because you have to allow for that kind of thing too. I think you're right, like to say like, why is it fun to watch somebody play against type? And hey, we got like a whole nother book out of here, you know, that we keep writing.
But I mean, I think on that topic too, a lot of times, you know, as you've been talking about, we do enjoy when actors play against type, but sometimes we don't, right? I mean, Erich, you mentioned Woody Allen is action hero, right? That audience just would not accept that because he goes so against brand in that case. And I feel like this may be less the case with actors where it's very clear that, you know, they're performing, but when you're dealing with like musicians, right, that musicians sort of change their personas, right? Miley Cyrus goes from being, you know, the Disney pop star to
She's Hannah Montana.
yeah, she goes from being identified with Hannah Montana and being expected to be Hannah Montana to becoming sexually liberated and so forth in the way that she has been. And there are plenty of other examples of this, right? Fans often are unwilling to go along with that. They resist it, and has in any way Miley Cyrus wronged her fans, I guess, by evolving in the way that she has?
I feel like she's following a script though, right? So if I want to go back to somebody where like their career didn't survive the little kid thing, and it's Shirley Temple, right? Who's, a massive child star, and basically Hollywood couldn't handle her being married and an adult, right? Because it's like somebody you've been watching since they were 2. But I feel like there's a script for this now, right? You're the Disney princess, or you're on the Mickey Mouse Club like Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake and Christina Aguilera and all these were, and then like you kind of fade out of the public eye for a little bit, and then you do something shocking, right? Miley Cyrus kind of turned it up to 11, right? But you do something shocking that's like, I'm not a little kid anymore. Maybe it's a shoot in Vogue, or maybe it's a song where it's more sexual than anything you've done before. And now you're an adult, and now you're making different choices. And I think like in pop music particularly, people reinvent themselves all the time, right? Like every couple of years it's a new look. I mean, Swift has a whole song about how like the old Taylor's dead, right? Except that she's not. It's the same stuff, right? It's the same thing.
Taylor is dead. Long live Taylor.
Long live Taylor, right? But it's so I think there's sort of an expectation. So if you're saying like, what would a fan feel like? Your fans you might lose the little kid fans, right? But you were probably going to lose those anyway, because Disney's got another one waiting in the wings. You're trying to keep the other fans, and the other fans kind of know how this narrative works, is that you're growing up now because so are they, right? They're not interested in Hannah Montana anymore. And they're, teenagers, adults. I mean, the Jonas Brothers do something similar, right? Where they keep, and so I think it's sort of expected in pop music, at least, that maybe you keep some of the same sound, but you have like your growing up album and your mature album and your reinvent yourself album. Madonna's another really good example of this too, I think. So maybe, but I would say probably not if pop music is your example, right? Because I think we sort of expect that. Because like we had to, I think Hollywood figured out a way to handle the transition between like a child actor becoming a grown-up and still wanting to maintain the fan base. Like, can they make that shift successfully, right?
Yeah.
And
I think maybe there would be something weird if they had like Hannah Montana break bad, like
yeah.
I feel like there are like ways that they sort of manipulate the space so that we're like,
see
okay,
that,
if you want
though.
to sort of save Hannah Montana a little space in your mind over here,
Yeah.
that's fine. And then
Right.
Miley Cyrus is going to go do this other stuff, right?
Right.
But I agree that in the pop world, right, there is that kind of like script. And I don't know if you all have been watching the other two on HBO, which is like all about, or sort of the context of the show is about like a young teenager who has like a viral video hit, and then is like sort of being like turned into a pop star. And the show is mostly about his siblings, but they make fun of this script. They're like, oh, like his like, he's got a pimple, time to do like, turn him into like a sex icon, right? Because he's going through puberty now, right? Like we got to like make that quick switch from like, the playground, right, context to,
Right.
the new stage in his life for marketing purposes solely, of course. So I agree, the fact that we have that sort of script available to us, right, to the extent that we can just make fun of it now, changes our expectations, right? So that like if you feel betrayed when a pop star, right, does one of those shifts, you're just like, you're fooling yourself, right? Like you have the wrong expectations. Whereas that might be different, right, in some of these artistic contexts where we, don't think of things in such a sort of like fungible, corporatized way already, and we think that we're making some sort of genuine connection with the artist and their views or commitments or ideals. and they sort of cultivate that on purpose, and then we
Right.
might feel like they betray us if they sort of run in the other direction.
It'll be interesting to see how Billie Eilish evolves, like her look and sound over time, right? Because her stuff was already it was different, right? Different and unique, and rejecting a lot of the aesthetic norms of like what a 17-year-old pop star is supposed to look like and how they're supposed to dress. And so she's already off script a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see like, how does she, market that kind of transition, right? When she's changing things, as she probably will. Or it might be a little more interesting, like to think about actors, right? So, and I don't know why I'm starting in childhood and moving up, but that was just the thing, because you brought up Miley Cyrus, but
Yeah, sorry.
Millie Bobby Brown, right, who played 11 on Stranger Things, and is now doing sort of like the period piece, as Enola Holmes, which is like she's grown up, but like maybe the fans are not yet ready for like sexy Millie. You know what I mean? Like nothing better mess with 11, right? Like she's too little, she's too insanely talented, and it might be hard, right, to navigate, because we do think of her as like, perpetually an 11-year-old girl, which, the actress is now 17 or 18, and that's a very different set of roles that she's, potentially considering and playing, right? And how do you manage that kind of expectation, right? But it's different, I think, if it's, actors, again, are, we know they're playing roles, right? Pop stars, we know, are really challenged, or packaged, right? Is I guess what I'm going for. Not challenged, it's highly processed, right? It can still be a lot of fun, but there's not as the appearance as much of like an authentic artistic connection, right? Because we know, how much goes into it. So I'm trying to think of a good example of like an artist who like radically changes their sound over time, right? Or, pretends to be somebody else or something like that. I don't know.
I mean, Garth Brooks becoming.
Yeah, I was going
Chris
to say Garth
Gaines.
Brooks,
Yeah.
right? Did that for a bit, right? What was just like, I'm done with country for a bit. I'm going to be a pop star, but I'm going to wear a hat.
Yeah, I can't do it as my brand, right? And so he puts on a wig. He has a little soul patch glued on, and he does like covers of like pop and rock songs, right? And that was baffling because he couched it as, I'm doing this for a movie role that's going to happen, and there was no movie, right?
There was never a movie. No.
Yeah, there was never a movie. And so like it was just baffling and weird, right? He takes off the hat and puts on a wig, and now he's Chris Gaines because he can't do it as Garth Brooks.
Right. Because Garth Brooks doesn't sing, pop rock songs.
Yeah.
And I wonder too, like, would it be possible now? Have we changed expectations on like what we allow artists to do? Right. Because when Garth Brooks was experimenting with that, that's almost 20 years ago now, isn't it? Like, going from, being world's most sellingest country star ever to wanting to sing pop music wasn't something you could do.
Yeah.
It's easily now. And now I think we sort of expect it, or at least that they'll have one album where they try it out and see if it works. And that can be part of what they're doing. Yeah, so I wonder about that.
Maybe an interesting like comparison case would be, fiction writers who use pen names mid-career, right? I mean, I guess there can be all kinds of reasons why you might want to do that, right? Just sort of like, one might be if you're, switching genres, like, J.K. Rowling and whatever name she writes on under for her adult books or whatever, but there's like, Stephen King wrote a bunch of stuff under Richard Bachman. And I think sometimes it's sort of like, maybe I don't know if I'm being totally accurate here, but I feel like I remember reading something about that case where it was more like Stephen King's like one of the most successful, authors ever. And I think he wanted to sort of like see if he could get people to, read and buy a book that didn't have his like name on it, right? Sort of like reassure himself he still got it.
Like an imposter syndrome thing. Like, are they buying my books because they like them, or just because like at this point it's a habit,
Yeah, exactly. So that's another genre where we have this example of people sort of like using that sort of like persona switch or name switch in order to maybe like try something else,
Right.
or move in a different direction, rather than attaching it to like the brand associated with their
Yeah,
name.
or also too, like if the novels and Green Mile and et cetera are good, right? But if they had turned out to be bad, like it turns out, nope, you are just talented at creating really creepy horror scenarios and not great at anything else. You kind of insulated your main brand from
Yeah, right.
this experiment, right?
Yeah.
Like you're branching out, but minimizing the risk to yourself. So yeah, so there's something really interesting going on here. I don't quite know exactly how we think through it entirely, because we're not entirely consistent about it. Sometimes we expect people to change their sounds or their looks or their persona. Sometimes we really want them to be the same. Sometimes it seems unfathomable, like the Woody Allen case. Like maybe if you played it really as a comedy, like where his character didn't want to be the hero, but I can't come up with a scenario where I would find it like a Woody Allen film, right?
Yeah. No, I think a lot of it probably has to do with a certain amount of like reciprocity and sort of like communication between the artist and their fan base. And like as we've been talking about throughout this discussion, thinking about like, well, what it's reasonable to expect given the context and the genre,
Right.
also what the artist is cultivating or sort of trying to make use of or even sort of like exploit in the process of building their fan base. I think that can set some context for reasonable expectations for fans to feel sort of upset or betrayed by changes, right? Whereas when you don't have the cultivation of those expectations, it seems like there's a lot more room for the artist to just be like, I'm doing my art, whatever it is, and like
Right.
everybody else can just deal with it.
I also think that it's and this is like the Gen X sensibility coming out, that there was always something fun in being like the only person that like saw what that band had that was special, right? Which is why selling out sometimes felt painful, right? It is not, they maybe even didn't change the song, but they weren't yours anymore, right? They're now everybody's listening to them, right? So really dating myself here, but my best friend in college, a massive fan of REM, right? So what's your favorite REM album? Well, you're not going to say Out of Time, right? Or Automatic for the People, because that's like everybody's. You want to say Fables of the Reconstruction, because that's 1983. And if you were listening then, like, and it's a great album, but that shows that like, okay, you're in this for the long haul. And they were kind of like your thing, right? And now, so there's, I think, a lot here that's not just even about what the artist is doing, but has something to do with like how we relate to them and why the art is important to us, right? And at least for like a certain Gen X sensibility, right? I don't think Gen Z is like this. So like whatever, everything's on TikTok. But for us, it's sort of like, well, this is like almost like private, right? Like, or like me and my friends who, like I borrowed the cassette because it wasn't on the radio, right? And I couldn't download it. So there's this whole culture around it that I think uh, affects like why you would care so much when an artist blows up or becomes big, even if they haven't really changed their sound much. I mean, REM did, but it's not actually even about the artist, it's about how we relate to them.
I dig it. I think we should leave it there. We've been talking for a while, so thank you both so much for joining me and talking about this. And obviously there's a lot more to say, but that's philosophy.
Thanks for having me back. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks. Always good to chat.
Awesome. Take care.